Hello, I'm John. I'm sitting on board Corrick. It is mid-morning and we've just got back from a dash to and from Cherbourg as a part of a training thing. Only in Cherbourg long enough to catch 40 winks. But this is the story of the trip there and the trip back and some of the planning and the thinking that you put into a cross-channel passage. And I'm also going to spend a bit of time talking about the subject of VMG, Velocity Made Good. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy this video. We had originally been intending to be in France and then Holland, but we're back in the UK, and that gave an opportunity to take up on an idea that I've been talking with somebody for a little while. They had yachtmaster theory, they'd chartered the boat themselves a few times, done a few reasonably long passages up and down the coast, but what they hadn't done was any cross-channel work. And there are some differences associated with it, some things you need to think about. And he asked if we could spend what we originally planned to be a long weekend going across the channel, coming back, doing two of those, more than 60 mile an hour, 60 mile an hour, that'd be nice, more than 60 mile passages that are important for as qualifying passages in the RYA scheme, but also to put into practice this without the context of friends and family, timescales, those sorts of things. Just concentrate purely on the theory and the practice of a cross-channel trip. So we got together in order to do that. So the way it worked is that 4 or 5 days before this weekend, we were both looking at the weather, looking for an opportunity to go. There's no real point in planning to go to France for 3 days and being pinned down there, or not being able to get there because of the weather itself. So the weather 5 days ago was looking like there was going to be a reasonably, and by reasonably I mean forces through 4-5 westerly breeze over the Friday and the Saturday, and then starting to go northwest and drop off during the following week. So there was a reasonably finite window that we could do this, and we made the decision to do it. So we set off. So I came down the boat, I prepped everything, got everything stowed, fabulous food by Elizabeth, got all the bits and pieces in terms of fuel, water, also did a repair to our defective masthead unit at the top of the mast. Very many thanks to James at Yachting Sports for that. But the boat was in A1 condition, and the gentleman who was coming sailing with us came down early afternoon on the Friday. We picked up, went up the harbour, and then sat down and spent a couple of hours doing the planning that you would do for this sort of thing from soup to nuts, as they say. So we went all the way through what was the weather, what was the tide, what were the options, what were the various routes, what were the pros and cons of those routes. And for us, what we were doing is choosing where we were going to go to, because the options were Alderney, Cherbourg, or indeed St. Var. What were the options, and for those boats on the Solent, if you're Lymington, it isn't much of an option. If you're Chichester, it isn't much of an option. But some of the boats in between can make a choice to decide to go inside the Solent or outside. So we sat down, we looked at all of those. We talked in terms of weather, everything from long-range forecast, short-range use of various apps, and little tricks that were, I think, very useful to pass on. So very often I will screen record my weather app on a time-lapse thing, so that when I'm halfway across the channel and don't have any signal, I've got an indication of what it was. Don't get me wrong, I also make a note of it in a book, but there's a lot to be said for a moving picture. So we did all of that preparation, identified a good time to leave, final checks on the boat, and then we set off. So the weather was westerly, force 4 to 5, and then dying a little bit in the middle of the night, and then coming back in again from the west. And we thought that Alderney was a good option. The the Rumline course is something like 220 from just to the east of the Isle of Wight to Alderney. That was going to be close on the wind the whole way, but Cherbourg was going to be a very easy alternative place to go to. So we set off with the intention of going to Alderney. We looked at the tides. It's about, I'd have to remember the exact number, I'll put it up on the screen, but it's about 80 miles. So it's a bit more for us than two tides, and therefore we did the diagram that shows you what tides are you going to see along the path that you're going at the speed of advance that you're expecting to make, and therefore doing a calculation of what the offset is. We needed to make 205 overall, so that's what we were going to steer, 205. And for some of the time we were able to steer 205, but no doubt about it, as the wind started to drop and actually it went slightly into the south, we found ourselves very much at the mercy of what was this weekend spring tides, and our speed of advance just completely slowed, and the amount of ground that we were making away from Alderney meant that we had to divert to Cherbourg, which we did. And then as the tide came back in, setting us to the east, the lee bow effect, nice big increase in boat speed and speed over the ground, and indeed speed towards where we wanted to get to, and we got into Cherbourg. Unfortunately, we got the tides a little bit wrong there, so we were punching quite a lot of tides, sluicing out of Cherbourg as we went to get in, but got in, got alongside, had the world's, had a very short kip. One thing I would say, if you're planning to do one of these trips, you're making a switch from having been at your day job and a normal routine to being at sea and watch keeping. I would say at that point you need some reserves of energy and sleep. If you've had a long week and a bad night, I'd say that a cross-channel passage with two people actually is going to be hard work, and you're not going to have as much fun or get the benefit from it as you would like. And we found that a little bit, where the gentleman I was with felt a little bit tired, little bit seasick, and actually on the trip back none of that happened. It was, I suspect, to do with the fact that things were a bit of a rush. If you're going to do one of these trips, take a little bit of time. So as I've indicated, the trip out, it was very, very, very lovely sailing, and for the moments where we were going where we wanted to go, it felt great. But as in the middle of the night, we just slowed down and started being slooshed to the west and very much away from Alderney. But we got into Cherbourg, nice little stroll round, not very long there, just enough time for snooze, use of some of the facilities. And this is another big lesson learned that I would say. When we'd set out originally, we were going to get somewhere, spend about 12 hours there, and then head back. But it is important to stay on top of the weather. I can't get somewhere and not immediately start thinking about where I'm going to go next, when I'm going to leave. And whilst you're tired and breakfast looks like the most important thing on the agenda, for me the most important thing on the agenda was, what does the weather look like? And we had another look at the weather, and the wind going into the northwest appeared to be happening very slightly earlier, and it was going light, and it was going to stay in for a few days. And it became readily apparent to me that actually if we hung around till the full 12 hours, we were going to end up motoring into a northwesterly breeze, probably with a residual chop, which from anybody who has motored a Contessa 32 into a slight chop knows it's not a fun thing. So shorter than anticipated time in Cherbourg. This time we came out absolutely bang on the right tide, so we had pretty much slack water in the harbour, and the course back to Bembridge was about 020. The wind was very firmly in the west, so we had a broad reach, and it was absolutely champagne sailing with gorgeous sunshine, good boat speed. Off we went, and when the tide turned and we were on the lee bow effect, we got a tiny increase in the wind speed and the boat speed went up, and therefore all the indicators, the boat speed was good, the speed over the ground was good, and actually the velocity towards Bembridge Ledge was also very good. Sluiced us right underneath St Catherine's up, and we came round the bottom of Ventnor, doing 6-ish knots on the wind, boat speed, and we probably had 3 and a bit knots of tide under us, so our speed overall was 10 knots, and that was directly to the waypoint. So we ended up doing the trip from Cherbourg into Portsmouth itself in about 14 hours, which is not bad, and we didn't have to tack once, which is a joy. These two trips are very different from the sailing that I was doing just a week or so ago, where we were doing a trip down, and this is helping a friend move a boat from North Shields down to St Catherine's. There, where you're following the coast, the mission is pick up the tide at the first possible opportunity, follow it for as long as you can, and when the tide goes against, particularly if the wind is not favourable, then you need to have planned to have stopped somewhere. Otherwise you do what I heard described as latitude sailing, where you go left and right along your line of latitude, but make zero progress in the direction in which you want to go, and we found that. And I haven't done much sailing on the east coast, but getting round the headland on the way into Lowestoft, that was quite hard work in what was just beginning to become a southerly gale, and not one that you wouldn't want to plan. But as far as the channel is concerned, you've got that east-west tide, important to calculate that, important to get the departure time right, and you can calculate in the ideal world your arrival time, and make sure you know where you're going to go if you can't make it. I've had 2 experiences now of recently of talking about VMG, and on my plotter I have VMG front and center of one of the data readouts. Now it gets a little bit confusing, but I need to know when I'm sailing, I need to know 3 measurements to do with speed/velocity. One is the log speed, and that is pretty straightforward. It's mechanical. It is the speed that the hull of the boat is traveling through the water that it is traveling through, measured mechanically. We've got a little bit of growth on the bottom, so I've adjusted so that I've got what I think is exactly the right reading. But the important thing from the log is what is the boat speed, and when I have altered the sails, what has that done to the boat speed? Is the boat going faster or slower as a result of what's just changed? The other thing that I always have on show is the speed over the ground. So this is the speed that the boat is doing over the ground. Imagine the water wasn't there and the boat was hovering above the ground. What speed above the ground are you doing? This is gathered from GPS, and what it does is it shows you your speed independent of the log, but taking into account things like drift and tidal stream. So sometimes your speed can be very different from your speed over the ground. And if the velocity made good is very, very handy in terms of asking yourself the question, am I going to make it to the point that I need to get to in the time that I've got available? It's no good doing huge boat speed in the wrong direction. It's no good doing huge boat speed if the tide is taking you in the wrong direction, and therefore you might have huge speed over the ground, but if it isn't in the direction in which you want to go, then it might actually be not good for you at all. A little bit of an example, at one point we were heading towards Alderney, the wind and the tide were both absolutely working against us, and our VMG went negative, i.e. we were being pushed away from where we wanted to go. and that was, to be honest, the trigger was coming earlier, but that was the point at which we decided absolutely we are just not going to make it to Alderney. Time to go to Cherbourg.
So in an absolute nutshell, at business we used to say that revenue was vanity, profit sanity, and cash was king. Sailing, speed is vanity, speed over the ground is sanity, and VMG is absolutely the king.
I hope this is useful. I know there's been a little bit of too much talking and not enough boating, and I'm sorry for that, but I get a bit of feedback that these descriptions of some of the techniques and language that we use in explaining how to navigate are useful to other people, and so I'm going to carry on doing them. I will try to add more video of boats moving around as well. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Bye bye.